Afternoon, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we are continuing our bullying series for October. And this is actually going to be the Helping Kids Cope with Bullying, or as Rich has on the screen, Bullying in Children and Adolescents. We'll get started here in just a minute, but before we do, I want to tell you who we are and what we do. So my name is Megan Sanders. I'm the Training and Evaluation Specialist for Partners Resource Network. And we are joined by Ms. Christina Henning, who is the Director for Statewide Services, as well as our speaker, who I'll introduce here in just a minute. Partners Resource Network is the nonprofit agency that operates the statewide network of parent training and information centers. You know us in your area is either PATH Project, PIN Project, or Team Project, most likely. We are federally funded by a grant from Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, known as OSEP. We provide parents and professionals with training, information, referrals, education, emotional support, and any kind of technical assistance that we can provide for parents of children birth to 26 years of age with disabilities. All right, so let me introduce Rich. This is Richard Capodagli, and he is a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas. Rich began his career as a direct care staff member working with children in the foster care system. Rich has continued his career working with children in care as a case manager, therapist, supervisor of a residential treatment center, clinical director, and treatment director during his career. Rich Capodagli also spent time as a mobile crisis outreach team member while working with a local mental health authority. Rich also currently maintains a private practice working with children and adults presenting a variety of mental health related struggles. So that is who he is. Before I hand this over to you, Rich, I do just want to let our audience know. And we are interacting today in the chat box, but we're also going to use the Q&A box for questions. And Rich has asked that as you guys have questions, go ahead and submit those. Don't wait until the end, because if we start seeing a plethora of questions come in, Rich would rather take the time to answer those questions for you guys and give you the information you're really seeking. And so we're going to go ahead and let him get started. And as you have questions, enter those either in chat or Q&A. All right, guys, thank you. And Rich, you're ready to go.
All right. Well, of course, I want to welcome all of you all here, and thank you for the introduction. And today we're going to be talking about bullying with children and adolescents. And this can be, it's a subject we hear a lot about. It's a subject that's been around, I think, since the beginning of time. But it's also a subject that we still don't often have all the answers to, in the sense that what do you do in a situation where you're working with a child who's either being bullied or, on the other hand, doing the bullying? And so it really we're going to drill down on that and talk specifically about what we can do as caregivers, as parents, as adults, when we're working with kids who are struggling on either end of the bullying scale. So like I said, many of you may have kids at home right now that you have different situations you're dealing with. And of course, if you have questions that stemming from the situations, this would be the perfect time to get those down in the question and answer section, so we can cover some of those questions as we go. Also, this is a lot more fun if we get participation from all y'all involved. And so one of the things I ask is that I'll oftentimes ask questions or look for answers. And if you can just jot those down in the chat box as I ask them, then that helps keep us moving and get a variety of different kind of, new blood kind of pumped into the presentation, so we can keep this alive and well. I'm not a big slide reader, so I don't spend a lot of time reading the slides. In fact, the slides are pretty much there for you to stare at, but it's really through our experience and interaction that really makes the presentation worthwhile. And I'll kick this off because bullying is a very common kind of, you see this a lot in different movies and covered on different news presentations, things of that nature. But just to kind of get an idea, do me a favor, in the chat box, let's list as many movies that feature bullying as we can. Can we do that right quick? If you can think of a movie that features a bully, let's get it written down in the chat box. Let's see what we can come up with as far as bullying. So, oh, that's an excellent one. Okay. Oh my goodness. A Christmas Story, we can definitely reference that. Mean Girls. All right, that's a good one also. What else? Wonder, yes. 16 Candles, Billy Elliot. All right, yes, keep going. What else do we got? What else can y'all think of as far as movies that feature bullying, either bullies or Back to the Future? Very good. That's a really good one, yes. Carrie, oh yes, the quintessential, the original horror bully film. Big Bully, yes, that is one as well. And for those of you that are seeing these pop up on the chat box, if you haven't seen these, Aunt Bully, yes, of course. The Breakfast Club, there we go. You can jot a few of these down, and especially if you're dealing with children who are struggling with bullying on either end, then sometimes it helps to kind of refresh your memory on a few of these movies and how prevalent bullying is. One of the movies I saw recently about bullying was a movie called 13. Has anyone seen that one? 13? It was really good. Karate Kid, yes, major bullying in Karate Kid for sure, for sure. Yeah, the whole and what is the one bullying technique that can prevent that can stop it? It's the crane technique. The bully for bullies, the crane technique. So you could try to teach your children the crane technique. I'm not sure how well it works in real life, but they say there's no defense. Chicken Little, the Fat Boy Chronicles, excellent. So we've got lots of movies we can reference as far as bullying goes as we go through the presentation. So I'll try to pull from a few of those for some of our examples. Cyberbully, definitely. And I also, of course, when y'all have examples, will ask for some of those from y'all as well. Good job. Okay, so moving forward, so part of what we're going to be talking about as far as topics, not a whole lot of slides, but some important ones. We're going to look at things, like I said, from both perspectives. We're definitely going to have plenty of time for questions and answers, and we'll go from there as well. And so what is bullying itself? Let me make sure I didn't miss it. I double clicked on that. There we go. Okay. So what is bullying itself? And bullying is, you can't give it one specific definition when you talk about bullying, because bullying is so prevalent because it comes from so many places when it happens. And when I say comes from so many places, what I really mean is that there's so many reasons that it happens that people do the bullying, and there's so many reasons that it happens that people are bullied. And so let's talk about a few of these. I kind of jotted a few just general notes down below of where these things come from. So let's talk about a few of these. So let's start with developmental bullying. And when you first see bullying begin, the very beginnings of bullying, let me ask you, what age would you say bullying becomes a part of a child's repertoire? What would y'all say? Where does age 4? Keep going. What anyone have younger or older than 4? You think where it begins? 5. Okay, very good. All right, 6. All right, so we're getting a little bit older when it begins. And I could pretty much say in all of those developmental ages, bullying can be very prevalent. But it actually, when kids become school, is when it becomes most noticeable. But y'all tell me, have you ever, and let's go even younger than 4 for a minute and see if we can see it. Have y'all ever had, worked with toddlers? I'm talking like 2 years old. Yes, Natalie, 2 or 3 years old. And they don't have the ability to express themselves verbally, but they have the ability to interact physically with their environment as well as with other children. So if you put 2 toddlers together and they don't have the words to use, That's exactly right. Okay, Candace, this is where we're going. You're way ahead of me. The idea that a 2-year-old will fight or push over a toy, and how is that fight decided, by the way? If you have two 2-year-olds, two-year-olds, who do we know is going to win that fight? How do we pick the victor of fighting over a toy? Who's going to come out on top usually with that? Exactly. The bigger child, whichever child is more developed, generally speaking, this isn't all the time because you know you have some feisty little ones, but really what it comes down to is you have children who are expressing their desires physically rather than through verbal means. So rather than saying, I want that toy, they take that toy. And rather than saying, hey, I don't like that you took that toy, they lash out physically and hit another child in response to something they see as kind of being an infringement on what they wanted or what their desires were. So you can actually have children who are regularly bullying other kids based on a size difference. And I've seen this. I had a little nephew who was just much larger at 2 than all the other 2-year-olds, just a bigger child. And so he got his needs met through kind of taking things, forcing things away from people because he was just big enough and strong enough to do that. And logically, it kind of makes sense. He isn't able to put himself in another person's feelings or situation yet. He's not able to say, a 2-year-old isn't capable of saying, I wonder if how my behavior is affecting this other one. All they're capable of saying is, I want that. How do I get it? How do I take it? So the instant gratification with a toddler is prevalent. And of course, as a result, they're going to get those needs met in the most direct way possible. So yeah, definitely. Now, I do notice that you kind of say, talking about sexuality and also with children who are struggling with any kind of issues such as transgender or struggling with any kind of orientation kind of struggles when it comes to sexuality. And I do think there's a lot of bullying that can stem from that in a couple different reasons. And one, the developmental part of that would be that you have children who aren't quite able to figure out what makes them different from the other children and how being different than another child will either draw the attention of the others, not always in a positive way, or that because you're different, then you're interacting differently with the general population. So that there can be a lot of that feeling of being on the outside looking in when the masses are may not be struggling with these same issues, and so it's hard to kind of fit in. And one of the things about development is if you follow developmentally when it comes to bullying, let's break that down for a minute so you can kind of see what this looks like. So at 2, the bullying is really about getting a need met, instant gratification. Would y'all agree? Instant gratification at 2 is really what you're looking for. But when you hit that school age, or maybe even right before school age, like 4 years old, have you noticed that children who sometimes have very responsive parents, and that's a good thing, being very responsive, and they're used to getting their needs met in a certain amount of time, when they are exposed to other kind of caregivers that aren't able to meet the needs as quickly, then sometimes you can have quite the reaction when they realize, what do you mean I'm hungry now? What do you mean I have to wait till 12 o'clock to eat? And so you'll get some kind of aggressive and bullying kind of behaviors based on that impatience that we started out doing the right thing. We've helped meet their needs when they need it. But at the same time, the downside of a child having their needs met whenever they need it is that they get to rightfully expect their needs will be met in the future that same way. And it's shocking to them when it doesn't work out that way. this is kind of interesting, and I'll tell you this little. I work in a facility. It's a residential treatment center. We're actually working with teenagers, so you can imagine there's a lot of bullying that takes place there. A lot of bullying we have to work to prevent. But one of my favorite moments with a teen and is when they come to the realization that they ask us for something. They ask their caregiver or their staff, and tell me that if this happens to y'all too. You have a child that actually has the verbal skill set. They ask you for something, and when you say no, or I can't this minute give you what you need, they are shocked that it didn't happen. Like, they are appalled. They cannot believe that it was even in, they didn't have a dream in this world your answer would be no. They had no clue that it was coming. And so you end up with some situations where kids basically, when they are asking for something and they don't get the answer that they expect, you can have quite a reaction. Well, with adults, there's some built-in parameters that are set with that. I've seen children that will actually get very aggressive with adults when they hear the no. That I've seen that. But generally speaking, they kind of understand that, when an adult says no, maybe you engage in a verbal argument first. Maybe you have to deal with that whatever you're asking for isn't happening. But if you've ever watched, teenagers talk to one another, and one teen asks another one for something, and then they get to know, that's where you can really see that bullying experience kind of happen. Is because if a teen asks another teen for something and they get a no, and they did not expect that no to be coming, then there isn't the adult parameters set in there to protect the other child from just being dominated if the one asking is the one that wants, just trying to get their needs met. Now, how does this play out more specifically? Well, in our, say in the place I'm at, we may have a teenager who is very big, very strong, and very aggressive. And so when they ask kids for something, they get very used to those kids saying yes to them, because they think it's because, that they're just asking for something that's reasonable. But really the yeses are coming from a place where the other children are actually fearful or scared to say no. Fearful or scared to say no. And I don't know if you've actually seen this. And so it really depends on the dynamics that's happening at that age. But for the most part, developmentally, if you go toddler, it's more instant gratification. If you go 4-year-old, it's more what expectation do they expect based on the needs that they had met when they were younger. Now let's go to school age. Let's say elementary school. Where is it coming from when you hit elementary? It changes, it morphs a little bit. And bullying becomes less about getting needs met and more about, what do y'all think? Where do you think this bullying comes from in elementary school? Any guesses? So 2 years old, it's about instant gratification. That just preschool or just that age, it's more about they weren't expecting a no. Yes, thank you, Natalie. It's coming from a fact that when you put social or peer pressure, or restating the question, when you're 2 years old, it's about instant gratification. When you're 4 years old, it's about basically, why is the rest of the world not responding to me the way my parents did or where my caregivers did? But when you hit school age and you get exposed, exactly right, to that social mecca, that social milieu that kids function in, the real question becomes how they're trying to navigate those social connections with their peers. And generally speaking, you end up with what's known as a pecking order of sorts. And so what you want is to have basically your peer group that supports you and that is inclusive and allows you to be part of that group. And that's the goal you have, is to create your group. But unfortunately, since all kids are different, they end up with different peer groups. And in elementary school, the peer groups are really more about, well, y'all tell me, what are the two major peer groups currently that get started in elementary school? What do y'all think? Two major peer groups where bullying can kind of have its beginnings in school. That's it. Thank you. And now going back to, I forgot who had mentioned it, but going back to those orientation questions and those transgender questions, now we even have a more than just the boys against girls, but you can have someone even separated further than that. So it could be boys and the girls against this third group. But yeah, basically it's boys against girls, right? I can remember, personal story, being in the 6th grade, which back then, by the way, when I went to school, 6th grade was the end of elementary. I know it's different. I actually grew up, for you Ohioites that are out there in the audience, I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. In Chicago, 6th grade was the end of elementary. 7th grade was beginning of junior high or middle school. So when I was in the 6th grade, I ran for basically student president or whatever it was, class president. I can't even remember what the moniker was. But being, basically in elementary school, what I figured out was there's more boys than girls in the class. So all I had to do was go around and make sure I had all the boys' votes, and I would win. And that's what I proceeded to do. I literally went around to all the boys. Basically, from what I remember, I reminded them why girls are yucky, I think was pretty much how I did it. And then explained, once they said, yes, I agree, girls are yucky, then I knew I had all the boys' votes. Well, when the teacher found out how I was going about getting these votes, basically trying to recruit these votes, then the teacher ended up doing basically a speech about why we really need to be inclusive and not decide our votes based on gender, which was really a fantastic speech for the time. I myself didn't appreciate it because all I wanted to do was win. But as it turned out, after the speech, we had several boys who decided to vote for who was running that happened to be a female against me. And sure enough, then she won. Now, will I say that I could have run Microsoft if I would have won that election? No. But what I am saying is it definitely is relevant to showing you the natural split that occurs, boys versus girls in elementary. Now, when you get to junior high, and ironically, when I went to junior high, I actually went to junior high in Texas. So I was at the very top of my class in the 6th grade in elementary. And when I got to 7th grade, I actually was at the very, basically it was at the bottom of elementary. So though it was kind of I kind of missed out on that transition from going from the top to the bottom. I kind of skipped that 6th grade and it ended up, because when I got to 6th grade there, I was at the very bottom of the pecking order again in Texas. So that translation from 6th grade didn't really help me. But getting back to the point, in junior high, what do y'all think? Elementary, it's boys against girls. What does it turn into in junior high? What are our groups in junior high? What do y'all think? Throw out some groups that are going on in junior high. Girls versus girls, yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, you definitely have some of those special ed folks. There we go. Yeah, now we're getting to it. So all of a sudden, those boys versus girls shatter those groups where the bullying is pretty self-contained because you either have boys or girls that are going back and forth, and all of a sudden you get all these splinter groups, whether it be cheerleaders and athletes versus nerds, or popular versus nerds, or very haves and have-nots, or people having sex versus those who aren't. You get all these different groups. Well, when you break up into these different groups in junior high, what you end up with is so many more places you can be bullied from. Yeah, it comes down to dressing styles and everything else. And these folks band together to create their own protective group in hopes of keeping that bullying at bay. If you only have one child who's struggling, or who identifies themselves as, like you wrote here, emu, then they are a target for bullying. But you put 6 or 7 of them together, and then they can get their needs met within their own group. So that's very true. So the groups splinter, and you end up with many different directions bullying can come from. Many different directions bullying can come from. Band is another place where, and this is so interesting because I remember this talking to kids when I got into college. All these different kids from different places came to college, and I remember they had such different pictures in their head of like what band looked like. Some in high school bands, it was like the thing to be in. So I don't know if any of you participated in a school like that. Or did any of you participate in a school that where like ROTC was a big deal? Did any of y'all go to a school where ROTC was a big deal? Like it was kind of people wanted to be part of the ROTC. It was prestigious. They were going to move on to future careers in the military. Exactly. The school I went to in high school, the ROTC group was not a group that attracted kind of, I don't even know how to say it, the majority kind of kids. In fact, it was collecting children who were kind of on the fringe, on the outside looking out. And as someone mentioned earlier, it was lower socioeconomic standing that began participating in ROTC at my school. There we go. And here's the interesting thing. I can remember showing up I didn't want to eat lunch, so I went to the, I guess where they have the vending machines back then, the vending machines where you could get some stuff from there. And I remember there was a group of kids, call them the haves, that were bullying, as I saw it, the have-nots, who all happened to be in ROTC uniforms. And what they were doing is they were tossing coins onto the ground and laughing when the kids who didn't have money would go pick them up. So they were sprinkling they were like feeding birds is what it kind of looked like, feeding the squirrels. They were tossing their leftover change on the ground and laughing as these kids had to go pick it up because they couldn't afford to leave this change on the ground. So very negative. So it's different in each school. And one of the things that you'll experience is that when you go from high school to college, then you tend to take these and put it together in kind of so these preconceptions you had or these experiences you had in the past of what it looked like, of who were the haves and have-nots, who were the popular and unpopular, who were the athletic and non-athletic. When they went from high school to college, it all changed again. And so how about in college? How do you get bullied in college? We've kind of figured out junior high. High school is definitely based on peer groups as well. How do you get bullied in college? There we go. They actually have kind of predetermined, you are in a popularity contest as you go around, and it's called Rush, and you try to get into this group. You try to participate or join this group, and the group then decides whether they're going to accept you or not. And when they do accept you, what do they do to you? Cyberbullying's huge in college campuses, yes. But once you join the sorority or fraternity, you end up being hazed in there too. So you get bullied there as well. And of course, in this day and age, we have all sorts of multimedia kind of avenues for being bullied. And a big way is through cyberbullying that goes on college campuses. And also the bullying that takes place based on belief systems. So whereas in high school, it was more like group affiliation, in college, you end up with more of a belief system that is being condemned. So if you have a personal view on this or that, and it doesn't match up with what the masses believe, then you can get a lot of bullying sent your way based on that you think or believe the wrong way. So that covers developmental. Let's talk about, for a minute, combining that with, say, relational bullying or traumatic bullying. Let's talk about traumatic bullying first. So when you talk about traumatic bullying, what you're talking about there is that you have been through a negative traumatic experience. And as a result of your experience, as a result of your trauma, then bullying becomes a part of who you are. So you either end up on the bullying end or the non-bullying end, right? And so let's look at this in terms of what's a trauma name a few traumas that you can think of that kids go through in this day and age. What are some childhood traumas that our children face? Throw it out there. Okay, yes, teen pregnancy, foster care, definitely teen pregnancy, death of parents for sure. Death of parents is grief or loss. Divorced parents, very common, yeah. Addicted parents, that's right. So you have substance abuse, homelessness, that's true. And then you have the basic, I guess you'd say the traditional trauma. So if you think about all your basic traumas, you have neglect, which kind of gets into the homelessness part. You have physical abuse, that's very traditional, where you were hit or hurt. And then you have sexual abuse, right? Which, of course, is where you were abused sexually based on, exposure to sexual abuse. And then, and you have these different levels of different types of abuse that occur, and as a result of your abuse, then it may either make you more vulnerable to being bullied, or it may make you more vulnerable to becoming a bully. So we're going to talk about that further as we go, but a big part of those bullying things come from the trauma you suffered. So let's think of an example. So let's say if you have someone who has suffered a significant trauma, let's say it was sexual abuse by a relative. So you can't really figure out how serious the sexual abuse, there's no blood test you can give to find out how serious someone's trauma is, but you can get an idea of the trauma based on the duration of the trauma. In other words, how many years did that trauma carry on, right? Duration. Then you have the frequency of the trauma. How often did that happen within those years? And then you have the intensity of the trauma. How serious was that trauma when it happened? How much damage did it do? So if you had, let's say you had an uncle that visited on holidays, and whenever that uncle stayed with y'all, then there was abuse that took place, sexualized abuse. Then, of course, as a result, the duration might be over the course of many years, right? From age 10 all the way to 16 during holidays. And then, of course, you might have the frequency. The frequency may have been, say, 5 times a year you were exposed to this during holidays. And then the intensity would be very intense as this abuse continued, very serious sexualized trauma that occurred. And so as a result, when you finally kind of survive that trauma and you're at the other side, then you're at risk for a couple very serious types of sexualized bullying. Number one is if you are more on the victim end, then because of how you see yourself self-esteem wise, because of your understanding of sexualized behavior and actually the kind of dysfunction that goes along with it. Because physically your body has been exposed to that, then when you're interacting with your peer group, you may be more vulnerable to peers trying to take advantage of seeing you as a victim and moving in to bully you sexually because of the trauma you suffered in your past. Another way to look at this might be, and a lot of times it's hard to understand. Have y'all ever heard the idea that folks that have suffered sexual victimization often end up basically with a lot of promiscuity? Have you heard that before? That they end up, basically putting themselves out there, okay, in a sexualized manner. Why are they promiscuous if they don't want to see their trauma repeated? How does that happen? Well, it happens because you're trying to make sense of that trauma that took place. And very much so, Jessica. When you talk about control, you're either trying to make sense of what happened to you, right? And then you're trying to be in control of making sure it doesn't happen again. Or that if it does, you're in control of it. But actually, that gets very confusing, and I'll explain why. Say if you have suffered sexualized trauma, and you walk in and say it was female by a man, it was a male who abused you. If you walk into a room full of men, would you like to know who the abusers are in that room, or would you rather not want to know? What's your instinct tell you? Yeah, you'd rather know. You'd rather want to know. How do you find out? How do you know who's the abuser in the room and who isn't? Well, with the kids I work with, the teens I work with, they go and they basically interact with every male in the room in a, I guess you'd say, provocative way. And the males that set the limit with that and say, oh, actually, I prefer you sit next to me rather than on my lap. Oh, I prefer a side hug than a front hug. Oh, I prefer a fist bump than than holding hands. For the adults who are able to set that limit effectively, the child feels how? They feel protected, right? But for any of those adults that say, yeah, come sit on my lap. Yeah, come give me a big hug. That person becomes, quote unquote, potentially dangerous. And so what the kids will end up doing is once they identify who the dangerous ones are, they have to control the situation. And the fact is that if you are choosing to engage in sexualized activity with someone, then you are not being victimized because of it. That is a mental kind of mental jujitsu, as it would be. In the end, it doesn't actually come out that way. You still end up with the trauma, the feeling of victimization. But at the moment, you think you're controlling it. And so that's how you end up with this kind of this paradox in you've been hurt sexually, and yet you put yourself out there to be hurt more sexually. So that's where that kind of comes from. So speaking of that kind of traumatic bullying, then you look at it from the other side, and the other side of it would be, how does a child end up being hurt sexually and then goes on to hurt others sexually? And this type of bullying is much more of either A, especially at a younger age, you're trying to basically act out your trauma, to resolve your trauma through repeating it. It's a way you can kind of systematically desensitize yourself by repeated exposure, if that makes sense. And so you end up acting out with multiples of kids to try and get rid of it. The problem is, if whatever switch there is gets flipped and you end up not basically not stopping that behavior, then you can end up an adult who's still acting out their trauma with children. And there isn't going to be a valid excuse or reason once that happens. Once you start victimizing children, there's no way to kind of justify that by saying, yes, but I was just acting out my trauma from when I was little. It doesn't work, because developmentally you should have shifted when you became an adult. Does that kind of make sense, y'all? Am I okay? So now let's move on to relational bullying. If we're talking about relational bullying, what it really comes down to is I'm sorry, you don't finish that sentence so I can know what you're asking me. But when it comes down to relational bullying, what it really comes down to is you are basically trying to either pull someone in with your bullying or push them away with your bullying. So either you want to be a part of a group so badly that you're willing to suffer to be part of that group because you believe the end result is you'll be accepted and included within this group, or you are basically bullying because you don't want that person to be part of your group and you want to push them away as a result. And so when you talk about relationships and how bullying play into a relationships, then you can kind of really start to see that push-pull in relationships. And what it really comes down to in that sense is whether you view relationships through a lens of permanency or unconditional connection, or whether you view that relationship through a conditional lens. So think of it like this, and any of you that have children at home, think of any of you have like foster children at home that you're working with, that you have children that are living with you, maybe even that arrived recently. If any of you have that type of young person in your house, they often come in, foster children often come into your homes with the idea that they're entering into a conditional relationship. In other words, they see you as only being as good as the last thing you said or did for them, and they see themselves as only being as good as the last thing they said or did for you. So it's an extremely conditional way to live. And any of you that have been in a relationship that is based on conditions, you know how unpleasant it is. So you know how unpleasant it is. So you basically, you know that if the person isn't trying to make you happy, then you really don't need them around. So you don't value them for who they are, you just value what they can say or do for you. So that would be the kind of the quintessential relationship component in relational bullying. Now, if you look at behavioral bullying, this is actually looks a little bit different. When I talk about behaviors and bullying or behavioral bullying, really what behavioral means is that if you woke up in the morning, or you woke your child up in the morning and you said, guess what? It's a brand new day today. You can do anything you want today. Just tell us and we'll go do it. If they said, hey, I'd like to go bully some of my peers, then you're talking about behavioral bullying. In other words, the bullying is happening because it's fun. Can y'all give me some examples of bullying you've seen between kids and you know it's happening for entertainment's sake? Give me an example of that. Tell me one of those. Write that in the chat box for me. What is a behavioral reason? Okay, there we go. Yeah, Fortnite or other games, the name calling that takes in place in there, the negativity that happens within those gaming systems. For sure. What else? What are some other times kids are doing it for fun? Playing on the playground? Sure, yeah, definitely. There's lots of bullying for the sake of fun that takes place on the playground. Here, I'll give you an example, and keep those ones coming. And you're really doing it because it just makes you feel good. That's really the behavioral bullying I'm talking about. It just is funny. You're having fun with it. It feels good. It's entertainment. Exactly, D. Putting a kick me note on the back of a peer's back is purely for entertainment's sake. Now, I know this is very minor in the bullying world, but let me give you an example that you may be able to relate to. Any of you that are that spend a lot of time with your special someone, your special relationship, either your spouse or your significant other or however you want to call it, but in your relationship, in your personal relationship, does one of you think it's funny to jump out and scare the other when you least expect it? So like if you'll walk around a corner and that may be the very moment that your partner leaps out to give you a real scare. Okay. So although now, did your husband, and you don't have to answer this, of course, if you don't want to, when y'all were spending time together prior to marriage, your husband said, "Hey, one thing I really enjoy is when you scare me. Could you jump out and scare me as often as possible?" If so, then that's kind of a mutual, yeah, he probably didn't. That's kind of a mutual agreed upon or consensual kind of bullying that would take place. And although this is very minor, and I would never call you a bully based on, scaring your spouse, because they could certainly tell you, please don't scare me. But the fact is that when you jump out and scare someone, it's that you're doing it for entertainment's sake. You think it's fun. So you think it's a good time. And so that's kind of what that is. And that's something your spouse may very well, quote unquote, put up with, because it's a small price to pay for happiness. So your spouse, Josephine, may say, yeah, I have to put up being scared every once in a while. They jump out and scare me. But Josephine scares me every once in a while by, thinks it's funny. Or the practical jokes that Josephine does, that's why, I put up with that. But in the end, it's well worth the relationship I have with them. Now, you see that a lot in siblings and with sibling bullying that you see. How many of you have siblings in your homes, and for reason and you hear those arguments that take place, like he's touching me, she's looking at me, all those kind of back and forth things that siblings do are really relationship. Yeah, of course not. You don't think of it as being bullies, and it isn't, because you've kind of come to the understanding that it's it. But and there can be very little difference between bullying and basically the power play behaviors. Bullying can be the roadmap to gaining power over another human being. Right? That can be the whole point of your bullying, is you want to dominate and be in control of another individual, and you do that through bullying behaviors. Now, what is the difference? The difference is, one, the intensity, to use our, I guess you'd say, our trauma scale, the intensity of the bullying behavior, whereas jumping out and saying boo is such a minor, low intensity that you both may have a good chuckle about it when it's over, and you actually enjoy it. So on some level. But then again, if it's something that you really don't enjoy, but the person keeps doing it, then that would move much more toward the power play, or the power, trying to gain power over someone. And then lastly, how long it's been kind of in your repertoire. And so you have to, I don't know if any of you have ever worked with victims of domestic violence, but one of the things that often happens is the frequency of the violence that occurs between the couple is not as important as the intensity, and at the moment it happens, that there's a memory of it. So if you have a spouse, and I'll just say, for this example, we'll just say a husband beating a wife or hitting a wife, it only takes a one-time event for that to be forever ingrained in the memory of the partner. And so if you if the person who did the bullying or the abusing, once they kind of established that one-time event of bullying, all they have to do from there is kind of hint or threaten the bullying behavior in the future to get a change in the person they're trying to get power over, if that makes sense. All right, so I'm not sure, I don't want to run out of time here, so let's keep moving. This is just a couple things on the CDC. For one, of course, it is a form of youth violence. It does take advantage, and that kind of answers your question of that power behavior, of power imbalance. It is something that you have to kind of do multiple times to really get the full effect. It does happen both in person and when you're not in person. And then in this case, it says cyberbullying, but I'm telling you, I had a bully that was that would bully other residents by basically destroying their things when they weren't around. So they didn't do it in person, but if they had things they valued, they would end up destroyed, and the message was the same. It generally is not between siblings or romantic partners, so that kind of helps you understand that although the example of jumping out and scaring someone is a bullying-like behavior, but it's kind of negated because when you're dealing with siblings or romantic partners, it's much more about the relationship and that kind of dance that takes place than it is about peer bullying. And it doesn't always result in physical harm. Often, school is the quintessential bullying venue, but it really can happen anywhere. These are a few quotes that I thought were interesting when it comes to bullying, and so you can read through those and kind of see that. I also really like this one by Zach down here that basically says it builds character. You often hear that bullying builds character, but really it builds character like a nuclear waste creates superheroes. In other words, it's more times than not, you end up with someone who ends up damaged rather than that superpower hidden their way. So, but oftentimes when parents don't know what to say, they'll say it builds character. And then, of course, bullying is a very negative behavior that kids have to deal with on a regular basis. And it's not only the bully and person being bullied that's affected, it's all the others that had to stand by and survive it, either visually. And of course, in this day and age, by the way, in this day and age, the natural defense against being affected by bullying is to pull out your phone. So if you're seeing someone being bullied, oftentimes people will take out their phone and kind of put the phone in between themselves and the event that's happening in front of it to record it as a way to say, I'm doing my part. But really, you're not doing your part to stop the bullying. You're just being a witness to it. So you're still going to be affected negatively by the bullying. All right, let's see what's next. So some of the risk factors that happen. So of course, becoming a bully or becoming a victim by a bully, there's different things, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, but to reiterate, one of the things that happens is that you see yourself as being different or others see you as being different. This could be orientation or gender or ethnicity or religion or income level. We kind of covered a lot of these different ways that you can be kind of, I guess you'd say, peeled away from a peer group and seen as different. Carrie, the movie Carrie we talked about, that's what happened to her, is she was seen as very different than the in crowd, and as a result, she ended up being peeled away and bullied as a result of being outside the group. And then, of course, poor self-image or unstable mental health both make you quite vulnerable to being a victim of bullying. You can imagine if you feel bad about yourself and believe the answer is to be part of a group, you will pay any price to become part of the group, which you end up being bullied in the process. And then, of course, mental health concerns or developmental kind of issues put you don't realize, or you're not understanding that you're not part of the group. You're kind of the entertainment of the group. And of course, when if you do have poor social skills or you are unable to find attention in positive ways, especially for kids that in elementary school, being the class clown kind of raised their status. Now that you're in junior high or high school, being the class clown ends up alienating you from the other peers. So some kids have difficulty transitioning through those different developmental stages of peer groups and of their life because the techniques they employed when they were working through those things in elementary school don't translate well to junior high or to high school or to college for that matter. So some warning signs of what it means to be a victim. Some warning signs may include your kids coming home and they have injuries and they're making up excuses or they don't have a good reason of how that injury occurred. If you're using somatic complaints to get out of things, there is a very good chance that there's a social reason behind it. A very good chance that if you're using a somatic complaint to get out of a social event, it really is more about the social event than the somatic complaint. If the child keeps coming home without their lunch money and no food, then yeah, that's the quintessential or the stereotypic kind of bully, is getting your lunch money stolen. Of course, depression and changes in self-esteem. And of course, worst case scenario ends up being self-injurious behaviors, suicidal ideation, and plans to run away. And if you think about it, these are all methods of escaping your current situation that you don't have a way to get out of it. So the next question would be, I think, before we move on to becoming a bully, but the next question would be, what can you do about it? I mean, have y'all ever wondered what's the answer? What can you do when you're being bullied or when your child's being bullied to stop it from happening, to change your situation? So if that's come up, there's kind of I have this little kind of model in my head that I follow when it comes to pretty much life in general. Really, I guess without making this a bigger deal than it really is the answer to life in general. So it's the answer to any problem you may have in the world. And so if you want to take that and be able to use that in your future, then I won't minimize it. It is the answer to everything. And so here's my answer to everything. First of all, there's 3 possible responses to any given situation or problem, okay? The first thing is you can take action or do something different to change your situation. You can take action, right? So give me an example of what it would be like if you were a victim of a bully or your child's a victim of a bully and you're going to take action to change that. Give me some examples of what taking action would look like. Talking to teachers, yes, you go find help. So that's a good one. What's another way of taking action? What do y'all think? Talking to your parent, yeah, saying it out loud, discussing, telling someone, an adult, what the problem is. That's for sure. How about what else? What would your grandparents tell you? Oh, that's true. Completely shutting down or changing your social media access. What would your grandparents tell you would be the answer to I'm being bullied at school, someone's picking on me? What would a grandparent or great-grandparent tell you the answer is? There you go, fight back, right? That's it. Yeah, just, stick and move. There we go, confront the bully, bodily. And the problem with this approach is, one, you can end up in some conflicts that don't go well, okay? Which puts you in a worse situation than before you went up. Another bullying movie, and tell me if y'all have heard of this, it wasn't on our list. Have y'all ever seen the movie 3 O'Clock High? 3 O'Clock High. It's an older movie from the 80s. Anyone ever see that one? If you want to do yourself a real treat, a real favor, you go watch this old movie, 3 O'Clock High. That's what it's called. And basically the whole movie is about a kid who offends a bully, and the bully decides to teach the kid a lesson. And all the things this child does to try and avoid that confrontation with that bully. Accumulating, of course, with the confrontation at 3 o'clock high. So you can do something different to change your situation is one thing a child can do. Fighting the bully, there's a chance that that works out the way you want it to, but there's lots of chances it doesn't. So that's for sure. The next option would be accept it. You just have to accept that this is your life and things aren't going to change. And you are going to have to deal with this on a daily basis for however long it's going to last. Do any of y'all have a child who seems to have almost accepted that I just get bullied? That's just the way the world works. I go to school every day. I hate it, but there's nothing I can do about it. So I try to survive it and get home. If you've ever had to deal with that kind of feeling of defeat or feeling of helplessness, it's very difficult. But I want you to know the idea of accepting it, that's yes. Taking a stand, defending others. If you want to know a real way to defeat a bully, it's by pulling people together who don't want to be bullied. So if you have one person standing up to a bully, you end up with a fight. 6 people telling the bully to stop it, it generally gets stopped. But when it comes to acceptance, there are situations that you can't control where acceptance is really what saves you. Can you give me an example of the one I'm thinking of what's the situation where something happens you didn't want to happen, and if you will accept it, you will be able to move forward? Pregnancy, very good, yes. The acceptance that, that your life's going to look different. Vehicle accidents, very good. How about grief? If you look at just even, yes, thank you, Natalie, death. In other words, if you go through the phases of grief, the end phase, or the phase that kind of resolves it, is a phase of acceptance. So your children, when they seem helpless or accepting of the situation, I'm just going to get bullied forever, it's important to help them understand that their desire to accept is a positive thing. It just may be that this is the wrong place to accept. That acceptance may not give them the answer they're looking for. Lastly, the last thing to change. So on the one hand, you have to do something different to change your situation. The next thing you can do is accept the situation for what it is. The final thing that you can do is something I call divine intervention. Divine intervention. And that's not a spiritual term, although you can take it that way if you want. But what I mean by divine intervention, and yes, you're right, it is not inevitable and it should not be accepted as correct, but there are many things in life where acceptance is the answer, and kids will oftentimes try to apply that same theory to bullying, if that makes sense. So it's raining outside. I'm going to have to wait till it stops raining to go outside and play. The sooner you can accept that, the more successful time you're going to have inside, right? Doing something different to change the rain situation might be engaging in some sort of rain ritual, saying, rain, rain, go away, come back some other day. That would be you trying to take action to stop the rain. But really, acceptance is going to be the answer when it comes to a rainy day and what you're going to do. But bullying is not. But kids will oftentimes try to take things that have worked in those situations. Not exactly. But if you think about it, that's kind of the point. You can accept rain. You can't accept bullying. But many kids, they actually do get to a place of kind of that helpless feeling where they feel like nothing they do is going to make a difference. And so it's easier just to accept that bullying. And yes, you're exactly right, Christy. This would be a good example of a place where kids oftentimes will engage in acceptance because they think they have to, is a teacher or a coach doing some bullying with their kids, and the kids feel like they have to accept it because that's the person kind of in a position of power. It's an adult. It's someone that other adults look to or respect, and so then you do see that more often. The last thing, though, is called divine intervention. And when you're looking at divine intervention, what that really means is you choose to do nothing at all, and as a result, the situation changes, and it had nothing to do with what you were doing. So to use the rain analogy, it's raining outside. You don't want it to be raining because you want to go outside and play. You go to complain about it raining to your parents, and when you come back, the rain has stopped. And so the problem is solved through no fault of your own. An example when it comes to bullying might be you have a child who's bullying you, but they're also bullying some other children. They end up getting in trouble for the bullying and being suspended from school, even though you weren't the one that did anything to stop it. When you came back to school, the situation's changed. You don't have to worry about the bullying anymore. So it's this idea that through no fault of your own, the situation will change. And that's kind of that divine intervention. It changed itself. All right, so let's move forward to becoming the actual bully. And here's some signs where you might want to be able to take action as a parent if you see these kind of things. If a child is basically dominant socially or overly concerned with being in control of their peer group, you can see where that bullying could stem from that. Also, if they have had struggles where they've been easily dominated, overly peer pressured, and they're trying to reverse that by taking control, there can be also that kind of risk factor. If you have anger management issues, you tend to scare people with your anger. That can be another place where bullying comes from. Also, if you don't have the ability to have caregivers or parents that you can kind of have an exchange of ideas with, and you don't know what to do, sometimes bullying will be the result of that. So you don't really know how to get your needs met. You have no one to talk to you about getting your needs met. So you just revert back to that kind of infantile response, which is, I'm just going to get my needs met through instant gratification, and I'm going to do it through taking things from others. And this is the big one. This is the one we're all afraid of. This is the one that terrifies us. And this is the one where bullying becomes basically life-threatening, is that you basically see others as less than you. In other words, you believe your needs are greater than theirs. You believe that you should be able to get your needs met at the expense of others. That's the ultimate fear factor in bullying. You believe you can get your needs met at the expense of others. So you could look at that as far as examples go. All right, so as far as becoming a bully, continuing that, you have being involved in or having a lot of fights. Believe it or not, winning a lot of fights can get you focused on becoming a bully. If you have someone that can physically dominate peers and gets in fights and proves it, there's a chance they end up practicing that because they don't have to have any, it's an easy way to get their needs met. Any kind of overly aggressive kids can be susceptible to becoming a bully, especially highly competitive or obsessed with the kind of reputation or status. It can also become a bully. You can see there's many different things that can lead to kind of that bullying mentality. or blaming others for why your life isn't the way you want it can help you justify in your own mind why you should be able to take from others because they've taken from you in the past. And lastly, of course, you cannot discount the inability to take responsibility for your own actions or seeing how your own actions affect others, which gets back to that meeting your own needs at the expense of others kind of thing. So let's talk a little bit about impact, and I'm trying to see our time here. How are we doing on time? Are we ready to move on to questions? Do we have some questions?
Okay. Am I back? I think I'm back.
You're back. I can hear you. I can't see you. Now I can see you.
Oh, cool. Okay, so yeah, we've run a little bit long, but great information, and I know that you're answering questions as you go and interacting. So we do have 2 questions that came into the Q&A box that you may not have seen, but other than that, you've answered everything else.
Let's try to answer those, and then we'll finish it.
So one of the questions is, screens exhibit some addictive properties, perhaps differently than physical toys or activities. Can you comment on the risk of aggression related, interrupting, or limiting to screen versus other preferred physical activities?
Yeah. The thing that's so insidious about screen time and bullying that goes along with it is that it's really a 2-factor kind of thing. First factor, people get really brave. They say things via a screen that they would never say face to face. So you have a heavier impact when it comes to that. The next thing is, and this is even worse than that, is that when you read a negative impact on your screen, you will then be able to interpret it based on how you feel about yourself. And if that negative comment plays into a issue of self-esteem you're struggling with, it can be extremely damaging. So the other thing is, it's not just something that gets left with you. If you say something to somebody, say you're driving in your car and someone yells at you and you'll yell back at them, even if you yelled very negative things to one another, once you go on the road, you may not be bothered with that for too long because you were not able to perseverate on it because of how short that impact was, how quick that went through. But when you have something that's written to you, you can stay, that gets basically emblazoned in your mind, and you can perseverate on that for days and weeks on end every time you go back and reread it, every time you remember what was said. So that's why screen time is so much more dangerous when it comes to bullying than you see even in person, because people just are more brave when they're protected by a screen, and your own insecurities play directly into your interpretation of what's being written. What else?
All right. Do most siblings that are close in age within 5 years bully each other to some degree during the years in the home?
Yes. I've rarely seen siblings that have no negative interactions, i.e. bullying interactions with one another. The difference is that when you see bullying between peers, oftentimes it has much more of a relational issue going on than a power issue or that sort of thing. So you will see a little brother or little sister intentionally antagonize, which actually is a type of bullying, the older sibling to cause a reaction, because they know the reaction is a relational exchange. It almost becomes ritualistic. How many of you as adults has a sibling that will still walk up to you this day and call you by the nickname you always hated? Or that will come up to you in this day and pull your hair or punch you in the arm, right? That's all part of that sibling. Although it is bullying behavior, it's relational in its goal. And so you end up overcoming the bullying part of that to end up with a healthier relationship because of that exchange.
All right. That was the only 2 questions that appeared in the Q&A box.
Oh, how will you use
So,
these types of things with siblings? Okay, I have some options for you on this, so don't panic if you have sibling questions. We have some good ideas here that have worked for me in my private practice working with parents. First of all, if you're able to identify which child is the antagonizer, and generally that's who antagonizes it, you're probably in pretty good shape, but that's not been my experience. Has it been y'all's? Usually when it comes to siblings, it's hard for me to tell who started what when. But if you know for a fact that this is the sibling who always does the bullying, you can just address it with that sibling. You can create situations where I'm going to continue on that for a minute. Okay, so if you have the little one, how old's the little one, by the way? 5, and how old's the older one? 13. Okay, so the little one antagonizes the older one. You might think that's partly relational between the 2 of them, but it also may be relational between the 5-year-old and yourself. So your reaction to the 5-year-old antagonizing the 13-year-old is to do what? What's the ritual? What's the regular response? The 5-year-old bugs the 13-year-old. The 13-year-old complains to you, I'm guessing. And you step in to say, yeah, you step in to correct the 5-year-old, right? Or to protect if that's the case. So the little one tries to antagonize 13-year-old, and you have to get there before the 13-year-old reacts to the younger one's antagonization. Does that sound about right? Okay. Try this next time. Next time the 5-year-old antagonizes the 13-year-old, instead of going to try and you basically put your attention on the 5-year-old, put all your attention on the 13-year-old, but not in a negative way. In other words, you say, every time the 5-year-old does something to antagonize you, this is what I'm going to do for you. So that the 5-year-old sees that they're getting no reinforcement from the exchange. You're not going to protect them. You're going to basically engage with the 13-year-old. And so you would step in, and you might have a system of different things you try or have to do to where the 13-year-old actually looks forward. You want the 13-year-old to look forward to the 5-year-old antagonizing them, because they're going to be like, hey, the 5-year-old's the little sister's bothering me again. So can I come over with you and do this or that? Whatever it is they were looking forward to engaging with you on. Now, there are limits to this, of course. If your 13-year-old is sitting there playing video games and the 5-year-old's in the room and that's where the antagonization is coming from, then that's going to look a little different, because the whole goal of the 5-year-old is to become part of the video game of the 13-year-old. So that's a little bit different. But how about for those of you that have to deal with siblings where you can't tell who started it? You try, but you can't figure it out. You're like, I'm not sure if they started it or they started it. All I see is the reaction, and I can never tell who's going to do what to who, but they're constantly fighting or bullying each other. It's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. For those of you that deal with that situation, what I did is I came up with what's known as a possession arrow. Y'all ever watch basketball? And in basketball, that when they can't tell who ended up with the ball, what do? They do a jump ball. And it's always after you do the first jump ball, the next time you get a tie for the ball goes to the person who didn't have it last. So I have actually had parents write the name of 2 siblings on the sides of a triangle. So there's a long triangle. It looks like a nameplate. And on one side, it's one child's name. On the other side, it's the other. Every time they engage in a negative interaction, whoever's name is showing is the one that takes the time away. The one basically the one that's in the wrong. And so you basically separate them based on whose name is up. Does that make sense? The opposite way of doing that, if you have ones that want your attention, is to whichever one's name is not showing, Oh, it's a little hard. Okay, so let's just make it real simple. You have each of your siblings' names are on either side of a triangle, of a piece of paper, basically shaped like a triangle. So you have, let's say you have Jack and Joe, or Jack and Jill, let's say. So if Jack's name's forward, when the debate starts, Jack goes to the room. Jill stays out. Then you turn the nameplate around, and the next time there's a back and forth, Jill goes to the room. Jack stays out. Then you turn the nameplate again, and now it's Jack's turn to go to the room. Jill stays out. And so it literally takes all the debate away of who started what. It doesn't matter. All that matters is we ended up in this negative interaction, this argument, this bullying exchange, this fight, as it would be. And so whoever's name's up, that's who separates. Then next time it comes up, the next person will separate. And what you end up with is they basically, because there's no way to convince you who started it or who didn't, and since you're always going to basically sending whoever to the room is the one that's name is up, they will work it out for themselves rather than have to look at the thing and figure out who goes next. Does that make more sense? Maybe, maybe not. Ah, there we go. Yes. So it's like a totally fair way to assign blame for the situation. It's totally fair. We can't tell who started it, so we'll just take turns. So whenever y'all are fighting, whoever's name is whoever's name is up, that's who goes to the room. And then we'll switch it around so the next person will go next time. And it works really well. You'd be amazed. Because after they get in a fight, they'll get to where they look really quick at the nameplate to see who is up, and one will be happy and one will be irritated. They're like, I didn't realize I was going to have to go to my room. I wouldn't have started it if that was the case. But that's the reality. All right. Anything more? No?
Don't have anything else in the Q&A box.
Okay.
The questions that were in there were regarding the recording of this webinar. Yes, it is being recorded. It's actually streamed currently on our Facebook page, and we will have it on our website tomorrow afternoon at some point. So you can get the recording if that's something you want to pass on, or if you just want to rewatch.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully I'll get to see you next time.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Rich. That was amazing information, and I know everybody is very positive towards you in the chat box. So
great. Thanks
for joining us.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye, Rich. All right, guys. Well, we're going to let you go here in just a minute. But before we do, let's talk about a few upcoming webinars we've got. Tomorrow at 12:15 Central Time, we are going to have Kia Saleh with Region 10 come and present least restrictive environment. And then next Tuesday, the 22nd, we're going to bring Cadre, Dr. Reese, in to do turning conflict into positive outcomes. And then on Tuesday, October 29th at 2:15 Central Time, we will be bringing a Spanish version of what was presented today and to talk about coping strategies and things like that with bullying. So if you know anybody that can benefit from that, please spread the word and get some people on that one. All right, we start back in November with some more webinars. November 5th, we're bringing in West Texas A&M, Dr. Bell, to do emotional side for parents of children living with learning disabilities. And then November 7th, we're going to do the Texas Legal Framework walkthrough with Region 18. And November 12th, we'll do transition services in the IEP with David Beinke. All right, and for all, oh, we still have some more, sorry guys. November 13th, Child Find, what is it and how does it work? And that's one of our collaborations with Region 10. And then November 19th, we're collaborating with another parent training center, and that one is Helpful Hints for Military Families with EFMPs. And then December 3rd, we're going to do Dyscalculia, Mathematics Learning Disability Causes, characteristics and interventions. And that is again with West Texas A&M. All right, for a full list of all of those that I just read off as quickly as I could, you can visit our website. You can just go to, it's on the screen, prntexas.org/statewide webinars. You can get a full list and you can register for all of these are the ones that caught your attention. This is our contact information on the screen. Please feel free to reach out to myself or Christina if you have any questions or ideas or suggestions for our webinars. And then this is our Facebook link. I know that somebody in the chat box asked for it, so you can grab it. It's pretty simple. Just facebook.com/PRN-Texas. So that's what we got, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.